Hello and welcome back to another episode of Show Off Your CI/CD Pipeline. And today I'm joined by Sebastien. Hey Sebastien, great to have you.
Hey Johannes, thank you for having me.
For people that don't know who you are, I think you and me, we know each other since Berlin. At least that's where we first time met last year in 2022, I believe, where we had a very fruitful conversation about a similar topic that we're going to touch on today at the community dinner. But there's a lot of people that might not know you. So who are you? What do you do?
I'm working for AWS since 10 years now. I've been in 3 different roles. I've been a solution architect for Alexa at the time we were launching Alexa in different countries and language in Europe. I've been in training, delivering AWS technical training to customer. And since 4 years, I'm in the developer relation team. So we are planting seeds, as I like to say. Our goal is to make you prefer the AWS cloud, and we do that through communities. You mentioned the community. We do that through blogging, podcasting. I'm the host of the podcast AWS in French. I'm blogging a lot also to announce new services or new capabilities, new feature. And since this year, I'm focusing on Apple communities. You know, the developers that are using Apple technology. So it's the Swift programming language, Swift on the server side, Swift on Lambda. It's pretty cool too. And EC2 Mac and CI/CD for iOS, iPadOS applications.
Yeah, pretty cool. First of all, congratulations to 10 years at AWS, right? That's an awesome achievement. That's a real milestone. And yes. I'm very honored to have you on the show. You're Amazon employee number 2 that joins me. I've already been talking to Michael around Amplify and AppSync CI/CD pipeline. And I'm really glad that today we're going to look at automating iOS or Swift builds overall, right? Because that's something that I also need for one of my private projects. So really eager to see what you have today and to share that with the world. So I already spoiled it a little bit. What are we going to talk about? Sorry for that.
I'm not going to explain the advantage of CI/CDs and automated build, automated test. I guess that's something the listener, the viewer of this podcast are used to. But when I talk with customers that are building iOS application, they all run into all kind of challenges, let's say like that, to actually build for iOS. There are a couple of very specific points that are different than when you're building a backend or an Android app. One of them is that you need to have a Mac because you need to sign your binaries, and that signing process can only happen on Mac right now. I heard that there are some people managing to sign and compile on Linux, but this is unsupported by Apple, so I would not bet companies' money onto that. So having a Mac is one of them, and having a Mac in the cloud, because hey, I'm AWS, so I'm not going to use my laptop here. I want to use a Mac in the cloud, which is also a bit different because it doesn't have a graphical user interface. It can, but of course in CI/CD we want to automate everything. And when we automate everything, we use SSH. And a Mac doesn't really behave the same way when you connect just over SSH without a graphical user interface versus what we are used to know and to love on our laptops, for example, if you are using a Mac laptop. And so these two challenges, having a Mac and using it in an automated way, SSH only, brings its own set of challenges. So for a large team, I talked last week to someone that belongs to Spotify, and a couple of weeks ago to someone from the Instagram iOS development team. They have a bunch of engineers and they master the problem since many years, and they are using super complex in-house systems to automate their builds. But for smaller development team, smaller company, startup, you'll scratch your head a lot when you want to automate your iOS build for the first time. And so I'm trying to document that. I start to write a blog series about that. It's not ready yet, but it will in the coming weeks, months, and to publish my code as well, so that AWS customer can get a starting point and not lose their time trying to build a CI/CD pipeline on iOS. Sorry, it's a long answer. but I hope
that's a great answer,
clear.
right? So, but without further ado, and I try to focus on the code. So that means we're spoiling a little bit what you do on that blog series, right? Which is cool. So I have the same challenge. So I'm eager to see how you're solving that, and then maybe see if I can reuse that for one or two of my projects. So my proposal would be, let's directly jump into the demo and into the code after this introduction. So whenever you're ready, start sharing your screen, and we can look at the details. Okay, let's go.
Okay, I have a very large screen. There are 3 parts there. On the left side, you have a web browser. It's a GitLab repo with a GitLab pipeline, the AWS console, and the App Store Connect for test flight as well. That's the left part. On the center part, you have Xcode and a very simple demo application. I call it My Memories. It's a type of application where you can take a picture, associate a note, and associate that to a date. And every day you see the memories from 1 year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. So it's really basic Hello World type of application using Amplify as well. So it uses S3 for the picture, it uses GraphQL, AppSync for the API itself, it uses Cognito for the user authentication, and I'm using the latest version of Amplify there. On the right side, you have actually my phone. What you see there, it's really my phone. Oops, I disconnected the cable from my phone, so it will not work anymore. Let's reconnect. It should come back automatically. Yeah. So that's really my phone. You see, if I'm going there, you see my apps. That's a bit scary to show your apps to people.
It is, yeah, it is.
I have nothing to hide there. And if I start the app, that's the app running on my phone. And you see there is the text there for the memories that is with a gray background, and that's not too nice. So I want to change that. I want to remove that gray background and make the app a bit better. So I go back to the code of my app and I quickly localize the one single line that generates that gray background. I comment it out, and I should see in the simulator here that the gray background is gone. So all I have to do, just like every time we do CI/CD, is to commit that change, put a comment for my commit. That's something I learned from my grandma. Always comment your commit. So remove.
And always add an issue ID if you have one.
Gray
right?
background.
So in this case.
Yes, that's true. I don't have and I didn't test on the simulator. I just test on the Canva there. In real life, you're going to do a bit more test before. Before pushing that. I didn't check if I push. So let's push the change to GitLab. And
why are you using GitLab in this scenario right now?
Why not?
Because of okay, yeah, just asking.
No, that's a good question. I've tested that, and I have a working demo on GitHub, GitLab, and SHOWOFF CI. My next step is probably to add Jenkins as well. But here I'm using GitLab. There is no specific reason. It works well with all the 3 that I mentioned, and probably others as well.
And maybe we can talk about adding Code Catalyst as well, which has been one of my main things. Right?
Yep.
Happy to contribute once it's public what you do.
So the setup here is I have a GitLab repo, and you see in the pipeline section, in the CI/CD pipeline, I have a new pipeline running in progress, remove gray background. That's the one I just changed. So the runner, the orchestrator, the agent is running in the cloud. I have a couple of Macs running in the cloud. I don't know if you know, but since 2 years now, you can get a Mac as an EC2 instance. So it's all the good things that you know about EC2. If you are an AWS customer, you have VPC, EBS volume, snapshot, AMI, security groups, IAM roles, anything you know and love from EC2 since the last 15 or 17 years, but applied to a Mac. And it's really a Mac Mini running in the cloud. It has an IP address. I can connect to it over SSH. Let's make this a bit bigger. Groups. Okay, there is nothing specific there, but I'm connected to a Mac running in Ireland. So there I've
with one minor difference here, right? And I will want to make that point on the licensing pieces. That means that you cannot get an hourly billing for EC2 or minute based billing for macOS EC2 instance today, right? So you only have that 24 hours windows, right? Which is a little bit of a limitation right now.
Yeah, let me explain that. So it's a full machine. It's not a virtual machine. So you have to use the EC2 dedicated host, which is not new. It already exists for Linux and Windows since many years. So you need to reserve a Mac Mini for you, and then you can start to use it. And there is something in the Apple license that says that we can only sublet, as they said in the license, for a minimum period of 24 hours. So when you acquire the Mac Mini, you cannot release it before 24 hours. Yeah. But the billing is per second with a minimum of 24 hours. But after that 24 hours, you can release it at any time, and you are charged per second, just like any other EC2 instance. One thing really important there is you are not charged when you start and stop the EC2 instance. You are charged when you acquire the dedicated host or when you release it. So you can if stop the EC2 instance doesn't stop the billing. It's really related to the machine, the physical machine itself. Just like any dedicated host, Windows and Linux, the only things special to Mac is the 24 hours limit due to macOS licensing.
And while we talk about costs, what about what's the name? Pre-compute costs that you can
cost savings, saving plans.
Yeah. Savings plans. Can you apply them for those?
Yes. As well? So if you have saving plans, compute saving plans, they do apply for Mac as well. So if you bought saving plans for your EC2 and Lambda compute, your Mac will fall into that category and will benefit from the saving plans as well.
Awesome.
So on that Mac, I installed the GitLab agent. It's running, and it's the one that is executing the different step of my pipeline. So what are the steps of my pipeline? I have 7. The first one is prepare Amplify. So to get the configuration from Amplify, that's really specific to Amplify project. I will not spend too much detail into that. Prepare the keychain, and that we can spend maybe a bit of time. So basically it's to fetch my build secrets, like the signing key, the mobile provisioning profile. It's an AWS demo, so I'm storing that into Secret Manager, and it's a shell script that will retrieve these secrets from Secret Manager and prepare that into the keychain. I'll come back to the keychain if you want. If we have time, we can dive into that, because that's really the most challenging part. It's to manipulate the keychain without a graphical user interface. Then there is the build. That's one single command, xcode build. That's pretty much easy. Then I have the test. There are 3 different types of tests that you can do. You can do unit test. You can do graphical user interface test on the simulator on the EC2 Mac machine. And AWS has a service called Device Farm as well. And Device Farm, it's a farm of actual physical device. So you can run your test on physical device. Here, for time purpose, I just bypass this, because otherwise it would take like 20 minutes to initialize a new phone, update upload your test, run the test, get the results and things like that. But if you want, you can test on real device.
Yeah, so I can also test on, sorry for interrupting, on different iOS versions here, right? So I can use Device Farm to actually test against different iOS versions and minor versions and stuff like that, to just ensure that the stuff that I do is still compatible. And I think if you have a cross-platform application, then you could also use Device Farm to test against Android and other devices.
Correct. Right? Device Farm support iOS, Android, and also a whole kind of web application as well, with Selenium and other testing frameworks. So you can test an actual device for web apps as well. It's not only for mobile. Then the last step is to deploy. Deploy for me means deploying to App Store Connect. So this is the App Store Connect and TestFlight. So if you are not familiar with Apple, TestFlight is the beta distribution mechanism from Apple. So my builds will arrive there. Apple will verify them, and then will distribute them in an application called TestFlight. That's my application. Yeah, my phone is in Spanish because I'm learning Spanish right now, but I have 2 beta versions there. It's Amazon Chime, the video conferencing from AWS that we are using internally, and the Amplify getting started. So now if I refresh this page there on the Apple Developer Console, I should see that there is a new build which is currently being verified by Apple, and that can take 10, 15 minutes, sometimes more. Yeah, you see here I have a new build. It's in gray. It says processing. That's the build that just arrived now. It's probably too small, but the date is now 25 of April. That's the date where we are recording this podcast at 7:19 minutes, and I guess it's in GMT time. Yes, it is in GMT. So that's the build that I just pushed right now. And once Apple verify that, they will push it automatically here, and I will have the app available on my phone. So right now, if I open the app, you see it's still the one with the gray background. But in a few minutes, by the end of this podcast, hopefully, I will have the new version there. So that's the general setup with a pipeline. The pipeline is defined for GitLab as a YAML file with different stage, pre-built, build, test, deploy, post-build. It's part of the source code. And for each of these phases, I give a shell script. So there you can probably say, hey, why a shell script? Yes, there are other options than shell script to build your project. For mobile application, Fastlane is probably the most popular build tool, at least for small to medium project. I decided to not use it because I really wanted to understand the very low-level detailed step of each phase. It's like when you are writing code, sometimes it's good to know a bit of C or assembly language before going to a higher language because you can understand exactly what's happening there. And so I have a bunch of shell scripts that are part of my project. One of them to set up the keychain, one of them to set up Amplify, the build, the local test, the device farm test, the deploy to test file, and so on. So these files, these 7 files, are just part of my project, just like any other file, actually, just like the source code.
And the shell scripts will also enable you to kind of use a different CI/CD tool, right? Because
that's a very important point. It's because I made that choice of using shell script. It was super easy for me to move from GitLab to GitHub to Circle CI because the only thing I have to change is actually the workflow definition itself. All of these are using YAML, but the YAML is not exactly the same. And so I have one YAML for Circle CI, I have one for GitHub, and one for GitLab. There are some small difference between the systems. Some of them are cleaning the environment in between the steps. So after the build, when you move to the other step on GitLab and Circle CI, they clean your directory, which is not super useful. You need to preserve at least the output of the build. So that's why there are things like persist to workspace here that are specific to Circle CI. But beside that, this small difference, it's just a coordination of calling the right shell script at the right moment in the correct order.
Just as a reminder, but these build step pieces and the shell scripts are all executed on the macOS instance, right, through that agent.
That's correct.
So that means that for GitLab you have that agent, and if you go to GitHub Actions, right, you would need to have the same kind of agent that is being executed on your macOS instance.
Correct. And I'm using different machines for that because there is a global state somewhere, which is the famous or infamous keychain. Keychain is a global database where macOS store your secrets, and this is where your signing key has to be stored. So you cannot have 2 builds in parallel because my builds manipulate the keychain, they delete the keychain, they recreate a new one for the build, and they insert the signing key there.
Okay,
does it make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense, and that means as a prerequisite, besides having all of the AWS the Amplify development, the App Store development things set up, you also need to have a macOS image that comes with the corresponding CI agent installed, right? Because that's the one that you use.
Correct. So the way I'm doing that, typically, I start the machine manually. I install Xcode on it and all the development tools manually. I develop a small utility that can download and install Xcode from the command line. So you don't need to authenticate on the Apple developer portal with a graphical user interface. You can do that from the command line. And I install the agent. So the agents are called launch daemon. That's the name of a daemon on macOS. Launch daemon is an application that is started when the system starts, pretty much like a service on Windows or a service on Linux. And again, there are some small difference between GitLab Runner, but basically between GitLab, GitHub, and Circle CI. But the high-level process is always the same. You need to create a plist file, so it's an XML file that will sit in /library/launch daemon, where you are going to give the name of your executable. And this is the difference between GitLab, GitHub, and Circle CI. The executable is not the same. The username, so it will run as EC2 user, staff, and then all the arguments, so the directory, the working directory, the environment variable, the path, and things like that. The thing which is super important is this session create true. That creates, I don't know how to explain that, probably because I didn't fully understand either, but that creates the equivalent of a graphical user session. So it's not a graphical user session on the screen on the Mac, but it creates an environment where it's like the EC2 user is connected and can interact with things like the keychain. So when you do a launch daemon, you have to, that's the secret to be able to manipulate the keychain.
Okay, that makes sense. And that's one of the things that you never know, right? That's not in documentations written down.
No, that's the problem. Right? So Apple did a fantastic job to make a nice graphical user interface with Xcode, and everything works. You just click and Xcode does tons of stuff behind the scene. And then if you search on Stack Overflow and the web, you will find old information, partial information, but really having a comprehensive end-to-end description of all the things you need to do. I didn't find it yet. So yes, you will find this session create on some thread on issues on GitHub. You read the issues and then you have to go down the thread and then you will see someone saying, hey, you need to put that, you try, and yes, it works. That's why I'm working on a series of blog posts, try to have like an end-to-end setup for CI/CD on Mac.
Cool. I cannot hear you somehow.
You are still there?
Yeah, okay. I don't know what's going on, but I can now hear you again. Okay, cool. So that's the pieces when starting the iOS images, the iOS build at the end, right? So the macOS image that we need to look at.
Correct.
Good. Let's move on.
So depending on the time I have, I can dive into the different actions of the script itself. Mostly the keychain, the build, the local test, and the deploy to test flight.
I would propose let's dive into the keychain, and when we dive into keychain, we're going to look at the deploy phase at the end. And then hopefully we're also going to do, I think we're going to see the change. If I see your screen on the right-hand side correctly, we might be lucky, right, to also see the change on your phone directly.
Yeah, actually, let's try. I received a notification from TestFlight saying that there is a new version of Amplify getting started. So if I open it, and you see the gray area is not there anymore. So that's the new version. That's the new build of the application that has been automatically distributed from my app. So it's a kind of magical demo. You change something, git commit, git push, and then on your phone, you receive automatically the new build a couple of minutes after.
That's really, really cool. Awesome. Let's look at the keychain.
Okay. I'm not going into every single line of code there, don't worry. But the high-level idea is what? First, you have two keychains on a Mac. You have a system keychain that typically hosts root key certificates, for example. And then you have the user keychain. Each user has its keychain. If you are using a Mac laptop, this is where your passwords are saved, for example, your web passwords. So what I do there is I delete and recreate a user keychain for each single build, just to be sure to not mess with stuff. So I really delete and recreate it. And then there are two keys to install, or two certificates to install. One of them is the Apple Root Developer Certificate. That's something Xcode does for you automatically. But when you're on SSH only, no graphical user interface for Xcode, you have to do that yourself. So one of the things this script does after creating the keychain, it's actually downloading the root certificate from Apple web server. It's a public certificate, so everybody can access it. And I insert that into the system keychain, and that's important. If you insert that into the user keychain, it's not working. So that's the first part of the script, to clean the keychain, recreate the user keychain, download the root certificate, and install that in the system keychain. The second part is to download your build secret, so your signing key for your project. I'm using AWS Secret Manager as a secure place where I can store my secret. So that's a one-time preparation that I have to do. I have to go to the AWS console, Secret Manager, upload my key. It's stored as a base64, so there is a bit of manipulation and string manipulation, but that's a one-time setup. Once you have that, it's there. It's in one of the specific region, and it will stay there. So the second part of this script basically is just called the AWS CLI, which is installed by default on EC2 Mac, and called the Secret Manager service, get secret value with the name of the secret, and ask to receive it as text. So there you receive a base64 version of your secret. So you need to decode the base64 and recreate the file, and then import the file into the keychain. And this is where it becomes tricky a bit. The keychain is designed to store secrets, so it's very secure, as you can expect. So there are a couple of authorization, like you authorize at the key level and at the keychain level, what are the applications that are authorized to access that key. And again, you need to have that right, otherwise the signature will fail, because the signature process will not have the authorization to manipulate the keychain. So you need to do that at the key level and at the keychain level, set key partition list to authorize Apple tools and code sign to actually access the keychain. And these little things, like the authorization at key level, the global authorization at keychain level, and the third tricky thing is to store the public Apple key in the system certificate and not in the user certificate. These are the three things that will make your signature work or not, and that are not documented, that you need to go here and there on Stack Overflow and GitHub issues to find it right. Honestly, I did that like 2 years ago, and it took me weeks to get this working. No, it works. It's there. It never fails. I do that demo almost every week. But to get it right, it was like pulling my hairs. And the last
I know that problems. Yeah. So just one question on this one. This is something that usually Fastlane would be doing for you, or is
yes and no. When I was trying Fastlane, it was it set up the key for you. So Fastlane as a secret sharing mechanism, you can store your secret inside a GitHub secret, for example, or you can store on S3. So you have to prepare your secret in a specific way, depending on how you are going to use Fastlane. Then Fastlane has something called Match that allows you to synchronize your secret across multiple build machine or developer machine, which is very convenient if you're working for a team of developer. Each developer can have a copy of the secret for local signature on their machine. When I test Fastlane at the time, Match was working well, but the signature failed. And probably because the thread I opened an issue on Fastlane for that, and it's funny to see the thread is still alive 2 years after. There are still people commenting. And someone told me this week, so it's really recent, that the thing Fastlane doesn't do is that line. So you have to add that to your Fastlane script to prepare the keychain for correct permission. So it's just one line to add to the Fastlane script. Honestly, I received information this week, so I didn't try it yet, but that's on my to-do list. So yes, you should be able to replace these 100 lines of code with a short Fastlane script to do exactly the same.
Yeah, so, okay, cool. That's what I understood as well, right? Even better would be, of course, to have an AWS service for that, right? Or for taking away that kind of piece of burden.
That would be cool if we can have a managed services that would deal with you just give the name of your secret and it does the configuration of the machine automatically for you.
That would be awesome.
I would love that. But right now it doesn't exist.
Okay, cool. So let's now jump directly because we're already a little bit running on time, right? So let's move over to that part where we do the deploy.
Yeah, the build and test is really basic. It's xcode build. There is nothing really fancy there. The deploy, there are multiple ways to do that. That's again, I will probably need to update these scripts a bit. Again, I'm using secret managers to store my Apple ID and my Apple secret. And I retrieve this value from a secret manager at the start of the file. Then I create a configuration file that explains how to export my binary to Xcode. I rebuilt the archive, verify the archive, and this is the upload. So it's only one line. So it's run AL tool, upload app, and then you give your IPA file and your Apple ID and Apple secret. And that's the part that probably needs to be changed because they add now the concept of an API key. So you don't need to pass your Apple ID and Apple secret anymore. You can just apply for an API key and give that API key, which is probably much better in terms of security.
Yep. Okay. 2 questions on that one. First one, those lines starting with X require Xcode or require macOS, so I cannot run that part on Linux either, right?
That's correct. That's totally specific to macOS. So these command line tools are coming with Xcode. I told you when I get an EC2 Mac instance, I install my GitLab or GitHub agent and Xcode command line tools, and these tools come with Xcode command line tools. And I didn't finish that story, but once everything is installed, I create a disk snapshot of my machine, so I can create more machine with the exact same setup afterwards.
Okay, so that means you don't need to do that manual installation of Xcode every time.
No,
you can do that. Okay,
once per major version of Xcode or macOS. So I keep a gold image with Ventura 13.2 with Xcode 14.1, and I keep these AMI.
Okay, that makes sense. So now you just said I built the image again. What's the reason for rebuilding? So I think we had in the pipeline the build step where we already built a version of the IPA. Now you do a rebuild here. That is not always in line with best practices from a CI/CD.
No, actually, it's not a full build. It's just creating an archive. So the binaries are there from the previous step, and it generates the IPA file. So export archive generates that IPA file. The IPA file is a zip file with your binary.
Okay, I misunderstood that. Thanks for clarifying that. So now we've seen, and I think maybe we can stop sharing screen. We have seen that part until we reach test flight. I think if I want to use this for production use case, there is another step, right? Which is not automated today, right?
Nope, I didn't automate that one. I don't even know if it is possible to automate, but it's the actual release. So for the actual release, you need to take a build in test flight and to promote it to the App Store. Typically, it goes with screenshots and release notes and additional metadata that you need to promote to the App Store. Maybe there is an API because they recently had a lot of API for that. So I didn't check. Honestly, I don't know. Maybe there is an API and you can automate or not. But anyway, once you do that, there is still the verification step from Apple that might take a couple of days before your app is on the App Store.
Yeah, and I think I was just asking that question because and I was talking about that at reInvent, right? To be able to deliver changes in mobile applications today is really hard, right? There is no automation, there's no reliability on when things actually come available to your end users, right? Yeah. And that's something that Google, Google and Apple, they have not really resolved because of that manual verification step that is still involved in getting stuff to the different app stores.
Yeah, many large development teams are using feature flag for that because they know that the cycles of releasing a new feature takes time. So they protect new feature by feature flag that allows them to revert back very quickly if in case something goes wrong.
And that makes sense, right? But you still somehow need to get that new version of your mobile application into the app stores, right?
Yes.
Somehow, right? And that's the same for apps, for App Store as it is for Play Store, right? And that is something where I hope that especially for smaller teams like the one that I'm involved with, right, gets easier going forward, right? And
really agree.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Cool, Sebastian. Thank you so much. This was really great. You said at the beginning you're planning to open source this. Is this already on your GitHub?
Yeah, it's already open source. Check the notes of the podcast. You will find the link. It's on my GitHub. So all the shell script that I showed and the GitLab agent installation and everything is on my GitHub. What is missing right now, it's a series of blog posts. But it's a lot of materials because if you want to go into the details of everything, it's like setting up the keychain, setting up the agent and everything. So it will be a series probably with short blog posts for each of these tasks. And I will work on that until the summer. So I hope to have the majority released by September.
That would be awesome. And that also means that if people find something that they know better or that they want to change or that they don't like, they can contribute to that on GitHub. And I think that's really awesome.
Yes, maybe cool. I'm doing stupid stuff like using the Apple ID and Apple secret there. Using an API key would be much better. Tell me if you think something is missing or is not as easy as it should. Let me know.
Okay, so people can find you on GitHub. Where else are you active if people want to connect?
Twitter, LinkedIn, Mastodon, you name it. Sebsto most of the times, SEBSTO. And I guess you will put the links to the notes of the podcast as well.
I will, then people can find you there. So thanks a lot. Was awesome to have you on board and looking forward to get this out pretty soon. And then hopefully also getting people to contribute to the stuff that you have been building. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.